Hi, welcome to the second lecture of the marketing research subject. This is the first part of the lecture in which we will be dealing with determining the scope of the marketing research, but focusing on translating the marketing problem into research questions. This involves determining what the research will do and what it will not do, and it comes from chapter 2 of your textbook. So in terms of where it fits into the learning outcomes of the course, it is addressing the first learning outcome of identifying marketing problems to assist decision making. So in terms of what I'm going to cover in this lecture, looking at marketing decisions, the research process, the scope of marketing research, defining the research problem, how to specify the research questions, defining the research objectives, and evaluating the benefits of the expected information to determine whether the research should go ahead or not. So, by and large, in terms of marketing decisions, this should be something that you are all familiar with if you have done basic marketing. So we have 4 broad areas in which marketing decisions come from. They are product, price, place, promotion. However, when we're dealing with services, we might add things like physical evidence. Now I've forgotten the other 2. You know what I mean. There are 7 P's of services. You can Google the other 2. But these are the broad areas in which marketing decisions need to be made. However, it's important to be aware that in terms of the research process, it is much more specific within these categories as to what it's going to look at. So by and large, a project will look at flavour or brand. They will never look at both together. So the second topic we're looking at is the phases in the marketing research. So here in this lecture, we're focusing on the first step. So that was determine the scope for marketing research. It is from here that the direction of the research is determined. As I discussed in the previous lecture, when I talked about the new Coke case and how Coca-Cola misdetermined the scope of the research or misdetermined their problem, meaning that the research that they did on the taste or developing a new and improved taste of Coca-Cola was actually completely wrong and not at all helpful in addressing Coca-Cola's core problem. It is at this stage that Coca-Cola went wrong. And it's at this stage where most research goes wrong, in a misdetermination of what the problem is and what the scope of the research should be addressing. So in scoping the marketing research, we have 4 tasks to do. It is define the decision problem, specify the research questions or questions. So defining the research purpose and objective. So why are we doing this? So Coca-Cola's reason for doing the research was to try and waylay or reverse a decline in market share. But in misdefining the decision problem, they decided that the solution was taste rather than brand. So, and finally, we need to evaluate the likely benefit of the expected information, because research is expensive and it's time consuming and the benefits may not outweigh the costs. So, defining the decision problem. So the decision problem is the situation in which the management has to decide on which course of action to take. So what should we do now? What should happen next? Which is the best option? All of these are decision problem questions. And often it's at the lack of clarity in the decision problem stage that leads to a failure of the marketing research projects. So I've talked about the new Coke case, but there are numerous examples of research being done to answer questions that don't address the core or the causative problem that the marketer is facing. So in terms of defining the decision problem, there are 5 steps. We need to determine the decision maker's purpose for the research, understand the complete problem situation, identify measurable symptoms, determine the unit of analysis, and determine the relevant variables or constructs that need to be researched. So, in terms of this first step here, we have determining the purpose. So the decision maker names the decision problem. So by now you should have read through your client brief, and in that brief you see the decision maker for our client stating what they see their decision problem as being. So in some cases it could be a branding problem, sometimes it's a product attribute, sometimes it could be awareness or attitude problems that they are facing in the marketplace. However, you might also notice in those briefs that they are not necessarily well defined in terms of what it is that they are seeking addressed. And also they tend to include information that may or may not be relevant to the situation. It might be relevant to the production side of products and services, but not necessarily relevant to the consumer side of the decision that needs to be made, depending on what that is. And it is the decision maker's role to assess the benefits and costs of the research and ultimately decides whether it will go ahead. So the second stage here is to understand the complete problem situation. So this is called a situational analysis, ignoring the fact that I have not included the AL. So this is an informal gathering of background information to understand the overall complexity of the decision problem. So I have sent you out to collect some academic literature and some secondary sources for around your client briefs. I have been very general and not given you much direction in doing this because this is the stage you are currently at. This is essentially to allow you a better understanding of the needs, complexity of the problem, and the types of factor involved outside of what the client has told you. Because the client might not be right, but you need more information about the situation in which the client is in order to be able to determine that. So I'm going to show you a video here. If it doesn't play correctly in the recording, I have also placed a link to the video in Wattle so you can watch it separately if it doesn't work here.
Okay, great. So in this lesson, our goal would be to apply the SWOT framework in practice. Shouldn't be that difficult, right? The company we'll examine is Starbucks, the well-known U.S. coffee company and coffeehouse chain. It was founded in Seattle in 1971 and operates in several countries around the world. Let's start with the company's strengths. First, almost everyone knows its brand, right? So it definitely has a strong brand recognition. Starbucks has been proclaimed the most recognized coffee brand in the world, quite an advantage regarding other companies in the industry. The firm's brand is one offering of a differentiated product to customers, which is coherent with its strategy and pricing. Clients have expressed they love the atmosphere in Starbucks coffee houses. They can use free Wi-Fi and enjoy the coffee drinking experience to the fullest. The company owns thousands of outlets around the world, and its clients can find it even when traveling overseas. That's a strong advantage, as it ensures loyal clients can remain such even overseas. And finally, Starbucks supply chain management ensures the quality of coffee served to customers is excellent. The company chooses its suppliers carefully, which improves the quality of its products and ensures clients receive a super coffee experience. This is another choice in sync with its differentiation strategy. Okay, very good. Let's take off our rosy glasses and consider some of the firm's weaknesses. One could argue Starbucks offers the same product in all countries where it operates. It does not customize it according to the different tastes of people in different geographies. For some customers, this is an issue, and they prefer competitor products tailored to their specific geographical preferences. In addition, Starbucks has a premium price policy, which is not in line with most customers' expectations. Not all countries have enough middle and high income class individuals who can afford to pay extra for their coffee. Weakness number 3 would be the high employee turnover that the chain's coffee shops have. It is difficult to serve coffee as a premium product when the company's baristas have been on the job for only a couple of weeks. In terms of opportunities, we can say the following. Starbucks can access new countries easily. It simply has to apply its existing business model in these new geographies. Emerging markets can be a great source of growth for the company. Starbucks has also entered agreements within the entertainment industry and partnered with movie-producing companies. That can be a great opportunity for the firm, too. One of the biggest threats for Starbucks is the saturation of the American market, which is where most of its outlets are located. Consumers are increasingly invested in healthier lifestyle, and some substitute products are better positioned to capture the attention of the health-conscious clientele. Okay, we'll stop here. This is what a SWOT analysis looks like in practice. The depth of the observations included in the analysis depends on the information we have about the company. I'm sure an industry practitioner would be capable to prepare a much deeper analysis. However, the important point is you now know how to perform a SWOT analysis on your own.
Okay, so based on that video of a SWOT analysis, also known as a situational analysis, we can see what some of the potential opportunities or problems that Starbucks will be facing. But be aware that opportunities present their own problems. So if I'm a marketing manager at Starbucks, my decision problem might be any of the following. So an opportunity for the company was to expand overseas, but this creates a research problem that might be which would be the best market to enter to continue growing the company. So this would be a market analysis project needing to look at what are the growth potentials of markets or countries in which Starbucks is not currently operating. We have threats, we have things like I'm losing market share to competitors. So how can I refresh the Starbucks brand to entice my customers back? So this is the situation in which Starbucks found itself in Australia. It entered the Australian market with its standardized model, and while initially it was popular, it steadily lost market share until we get to the third point where Starbucks failed in the Australian market in the past. So Starbucks reduced the number of stores substantially and is largely targeted to tourists in Australia. So a decision problem for Starbucks now is, should Starbucks re-enter the Australian market but with a differentiated strategy this time? So what are the opportunities and threats that Starbucks would face in adopting a different strategy for the Australian market versus the rest of the world? And finally, one of the other threats that was indicated in the situational analysis was the increase in health-conscious consumers. So Starbucks might have a decision problem of what products could it add to its lineup to attract these consumers. Does Starbucks want to attract health-conscious consumers, or is it the non-health conscious consumer segment? It's the designated one that it is targeting, and someone else a competitor can have the health conscious consumer. So then we end up on stage 3 of decision problem activities. This is identifying the measurable symptoms. So this is when we need to separate the possible underlying causes of a problem from the observable symptoms. So if the decision problem is declining sales, as defined by the client, that might just be a symptom of some underlying cause. So for example, in the Starbucks example, we had, I'm losing market share to competitors. How can I refresh the Starbucks brand to entice my customers back? So the losing market share would equal a symptom. It's not the problem itself. It is a symptom of some underlying problem. But in this statement, the underlying cause is attributed to a tired brand, that Starbucks needs to refresh its brand in order to attract customers back. So this is where we need to question, is this actually the cause of my problem? It may or may not be. It could just be that Starbucks standardized products don't appeal to customers in that particular target market. When Starbucks entered the Australian market, people found their coffee too bitter and overpriced for the style of coffee that was made at Starbucks versus the competing products that are available in the Australian market, which has a long history of coffee drinking and high-end coffee drinking. The fourth step we need to do here is determine the unit of analysis. So is Starbucks' issue with individual customers, with households? Some decisions are made by household groups or family groups. Is it an organization that is their unit of analysis? So if they had a B2B problem, say they were trying to determine the best supply chain arrangements, that means their unit of analysis would be supply organizations. Or is it specific groups? So for instance, it could be health conscious consumers. That is a specific group or segment of the market that is the unit of analysis. So this step becomes crucial for understanding how best to sample and also the development of appropriate scales to measure the concepts of interest. And finally, we need to determine the relevant variables or constructs that we want to understand. So some of the common ones include brand awareness, attitudes, intentions to purchase, importance factors, or importance of attributes, some demographic characteristics, satisfaction of experience. So there are nearly an infinite number of constructs that can be measured. It is the literature review and academic literature is extremely useful in terms of identifying these constructs, and in particular how these constructs can be measured, particularly in quantitative ways. So the second step of the marketing research process is specifying the research question. So once we've decided the decision problem, for instance, is the need for Starbucks to refresh their brand, now we need to figure out what are the specific research questions we need to ask about refreshing a brand. What is that? So we need to reformulate this decision problem into research questions. So a decision problem was, we need to refresh our brand in order to appeal to our existing or past customers. The research questions would then become things like, what are latest trends in coffee drinking? How do our current customers view our brand? How would customers prefer to see our brand? So these questions all need to include a when, where, who, why, what, or how kind of word at the beginning of them, and each research question should only include one of these words. So after we've got our research question or research questions, we need to define the research purpose and objectives. So for what purpose is Starbucks needing to refresh their brand? So the overarching aim of the research is in refreshing the brand, is the overall purpose of the research in order to discover how Starbucks should reposition their brand, to understand whether current customers view the Starbucks brand as tired. Is the research purpose in order to develop a new way of branding Starbucks entirely? So what is it that is hoped to be achieved from the research? Because in outlining what is to be achieved, that then guides the rest of the research project decisions. The research objectives dissect the overall purpose into achievable, measurable, reachable, specific objectives. So that's that SMART acronym that you often hear. So often they're written very similar to the research questions, but these are much more towards overall achievements towards the end of the research. So for example, here is what this process ends up looking like. So the situation, very, very briefly, a small retail specialty shop featuring men's casual wear on the Gold Coast was concerned about its low in-store traffic, that is patronage. So the management's decision problem is stated as, could my shop's retail concept be modified to increase in-store traffic? So you notice in that decision problem that the men's casual wear is not mentioned. They have focused on low in-store traffic as the problem, not the men's casual wear as being the problem. So in terms of the research questions, we have two questions here. What shop features and product portfolio composition do people deem important when selecting a retail outlet in which to shop for men's casual wear, and how do people evaluate this shop's performance? So there we see the two research words used, what and how. None of these research questions include more than one of these question words. And finally, we see the research objectives, which is to identify the shop features and product portfolio composition that consumers buying men's casual wear deem important, which relates to sub-question 1, and to identify how well the shop performs on the identified shop and product portfolio characteristics, which is research question 2. And finally, evaluating the likely benefit of the expected information. So should the research go ahead, do the benefits outweigh the costs? So benefits versus costs. So we have availability of data. This includes secondary and primary sources. Can we actually access our customers in a timely fashion or at all? In some product categories, people simply do not want to talk about their use of that product category, or they might simply be too dispersed in order to be able to be contacted in an effective manner. There could be time constraints. So Starbucks could be faced with the launch of another massive coffee chain that is competing directly with them. And they might need to respond to this competitive threat straight away. So there might be no time to research what would actually be the best way to respond to this competitive threat. Resource requirements. Do we have the money, the personnel, the expertise in order to conduct the research? Often within companies, they do not have the resources to conduct research themselves, which is why there's an industry of research professionals that can produce specific types of research outputs. So there's actually research companies that specialize in taste testing of food and beverage products. There are marketing research companies that specialize in doing more qualitative research. There's research companies that specialize in specific research areas, such as FMCG, which is fast-moving consumer goods, and also industrial or B2B kind of research projects. And in evaluating these first three things, the client and the researcher needs to evaluate the cost versus benefits of doing the research itself. So, is the expected increase in profits going to make up for the costs involved in conducting the research? So in summary, we have this idea that because marketing is becoming more complex, the decisions that we need to do are also becoming more complex. Determining the scope of the research consists of 4 interrelated tasks. This is the most crucial stage of the research process. in determining what is the problem that is actually the cause or the central aspect of the decision that needs to be made. So we looked at decision-making problems and the 5 activities that need to be conducted there. We've looked at the research questions that allow us to then formulate research objectives. And it should be noted that in the research questions, these then become either the research questions or sometimes the research objectives are used. They become the structure around which the findings of research reports are structured. And finally, in terms of determining whether a research project should go ahead, we look at the benefit of the expected information versus the costs of attaining it.